go like that. Thanks, sir. Always glad to see somebody's got their wits about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to say, write down everything I write down and draw everything I draw, and it will go well with you. Because also, my suggestion is do it in the same place on your page as I do, and also do it the same size as I do. Because usually if I make something big, there's a reason for it. It's because I want to add a certain level of detail. So the biggest mistake people make traditionally is they try to save paper, and really that's the absolute worst drawing I've ever done. People try to save paper, which is the absolute hugest mistake, because after all, paper is a tool, right? So it's like, oh, I'll only buy half as many tools. No, that's the wrong approach. It's the wrong approach. So let me go ahead and do this. How do I draw this? Well, usually I draw it like this, except I draw it a lot better. So maybe
Can't
I
see your
can.
screen.
Pardon?
I can't see the screen.
Ah, thank you. Oh, I just keep getting better and better. Keep getting more and more professional as time goes on. There we go. Good. So you can't see how terrible my drawing is.
Nope.
Really? What in the world is going on here? Let's try it.
Michelle, did you get my text? Okay, good.
Oh. Oh no, not another one of these drawings.
I know. Oops.
You remember that, Sabri?
Yes.
What are you saying?
Oh, nothing. You seen it, the drawing I made that day?
Oh,
There he is, because I wasn't trying to do anything like that.
there we go.
Okay.
Finally got someone who knows what they're talking about. Yeah, that's better, right?
Yep.
We done this part? This thing right here is called a cap screw, but most of you know it as a bolt. And you can see that it has a head. Actually, it has a hex head. Hey, Chuck. And it's also got threads. So that would be roscas. And that would be, I guess, cabeza, right?
Mm.
Bolt is actually perno. We haven't already done this, have we?
I don't know.
Have we?
No, we've done tools, but not
Wait a minute.
not bolts like this.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay.
Are you sure? No.
Well, because we're talking about fasteners.
No, they were
Oh,
just
we
that was
have.
for the oil drain plug.
We did.
We have done fasteners.
The Spanish is coming back to me. No.
Yeah, we have done them.
Yeah.
We can do gaskets and seals and stuff.
So we have done fasteners?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yeah, it seems like I'm looking for it, but I don't remember.
It's when we did tools, I think.
Yeah. That's probably correct. Raina. Okay. All right. So we can do gaskets and seals. Okay, let's do gaskets and seals. Well, what's a gasket? Well, let me show you a pan gasket. Let's just say it kind of goes around like this. Got that hole there, that hole there. I don't know what this is a gasket for, but something like that. All right, that thing right there is a gasket. Now, gaskets can be made out of different materials. I mean, they got paper gaskets. That's the cheapest, simpler one. They got cork gaskets. Cork dries out, right? You know, like old wine bottles.
Yeah.
We've got rubberized cork. Thanks for the tip, Michelle. Which is to say it's cork mixed with rubber. We got rubber. We got metal. Uh-oh. And of course, we have what we would call sandwich gaskets, which is to say a couple of different layers made of different materials for different applications. Okay, so what do you need to know about gaskets? Well, a gasket is a member of the seal family. The whole purpose of the gasket is to create a seal. And we need to understand that gaskets are very delicate little mechanisms. And as a result, we need to take good care of them, right? We need to install them correctly. We need to maintain them correctly. There can be a whole lot of problems caused by treating gaskets inappropriately, like exhaust manifolds. So I want to talk about those. But the first thing we need to understand is gaskets. Now, interestingly enough, back when I was down at downtown LA, I had a student that was one of the original Vietnamese boat people. And in Vietnam, nobody's got enough money to buy head gaskets, or at least back in the early 70s, 60s, whatever. No one had enough money to buy a real head gasket, but these guys had a lot of time. So what they would do is they'd get a piece of cardboard and they would get a wrench and they would bang this thing out on top of the cylinder. And I swear to God, it would look exactly like a factory gasket. It was so awesome. It would just, and the weird part was, you'd think, oh, they must be using all kinds of interesting tools. No, they were doing it like this. And they would come around and they would just go around the hole until eventually the thing punched through and the hole would be perfect. And I swear to God, this guy could make gaskets that would drive you insane. They were incredible to look at. And he could make them out of like manila envelopes, stuff like that. Because what they would do is, since they had time but they didn't have any money, they would make a head gasket out of like a piece of cardboard, and then they'd ride their motorcycle like 100 miles, and then they'd come back the next day, take the head off, and make another gasket.
Oh,
Wow.
I mean, that's how they lived. I'll tell you how else they lived. They had 420 people on what, a 24-foot boat?
Dang.
Awful, yeah, awful. And you know, it's like they ran out of water. They're right in the middle of the South China Sea. So they were like drinking people's blood, and the pirates would come and take out everybody else's gold fillings. And that's why as soon as they hit the beach in Thailand, they'd go out and smash a hole in the boat so they couldn't get pulled back out, because that's what they were doing at the time.
Crazy.
Yeah, so when you start feeling sorry for yourself, you know, because your Starbucks coffee didn't come with the right amount of caramel. Yeah, you know. Anyways, gaskets. So in general, the cheaper and simpler the gasket is, the less work it's going to be expected to do. I'm talking to you, paper. Now, paper, as you know, doesn't usually do well when it gets wet. So this is something you'd have to keep dry. So we have to understand the forces that are working against gaskets so that we understand why they're constructed the way they are. All right, you got that?
Mhm.
All right. I'm down at Belmont Community Adult School, right in the middle of 18th Street territory. And these guys had a oil pan gasket leak on like an 84 Honda. And so they actually, this was a customer's car, because these guys, what they used to do is they would go around the neighborhood all week and drum up business. And then they'd come in on a Saturday and just bang out like $2,000 worth of business.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a smart move because they got to use my lifts and all my equipment, you know. So, you know, they do a couple of CV joints, or they do a couple of McPherson struts or stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's nice. It's nice to see them, you know, have an operation. Anyways, these guys had an 84 Honda that had a oil pan gasket leak. I mean, oil was coming out where the oil pan gasket is. So they just assumed that the gasket was bad. So they went to all this work and they replaced the oil pan gasket, and they pulled it out of the shop, and we were standing around talking about how quick they got the job done. And they left the engine running, and sure enough, within about 10 minutes, oil started jumping out of the oil pan gasket because they had misdiagnosed the problem. See, right here we got the engine block. This is a cutaway view. That's the engine block, or cylinder block, whatever you want to call it. Piece of cast iron. And then down here, put a little bolt right there. Down here is the oil pan. And in between those two is pan gasket. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it was rubberized cork. They use rubberized cork because rubber, as you know, it gets attacked by heat and oil, so that's no good. But cork really lacks kind of substance, and it starts to lose its flexibility, and it dries up like a wine bottle cork. So rubberized cork was all the rage. In fact, it kind of still is, because it gives you the best of both worlds ish. Anyways, so this is a cutaway view, and you know the oil level is, you know, right there or whatever. Okay, so the question is, how is this pan gasket leaking? Well, what you have to understand is this is just a flat gasket. It's supposed to have the same pressure on this side that it has on that side, because we already talked about pressures, right? Let's review. I've got two balloons connected by a piece of pipe. We've done this, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So if I have 15 psi here and I have 0 psi here, will there be flow?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right to left.
that's correct. Yeah, because flow always goes from high to low. Well, this is a flat gasket, rubberized cork. It's not going to seal if you have pressure on one side and you don't have pressure on the other. So here's what happened. Did you guess it yet, Chuck?
Blown head gasket? PCB?
No, although that would do it. What it was the positive crankcase ventilation valve was bad.
PCB valve.
Now he's got a pressurized crankcase. And the problem is, when you've got pressure on the gasket like this and you got no pressure on the other side, it's going to push oil across that gasket, and there's nothing you can do, because that gasket is just supposed to be there, you know, keeping things dry. But if you put pressure on it, there's no way it can seal it. It's not a seal, it's just a gasket. So what happened was I looked at the PCV valve, which is supposed to keep pressure from building up in the crankcase, and it was bad. So really all they had to do was change the PCV valve. And I think the customer was watching at the time too, which is just icing on the cake. Anyway, what it does is it reminds us that correct diagnosis is paramount, really, when it comes to fixing cars, because if you take the logical approach, look, the oil pan gasket is leaking, therefore I got a bad oil pan gasket. I mean, that was a lot of work because you have to lift the engine to get the pan out, and then, you know, and that's a transaxle, so that's a lot of work. So one of the things we have to watch out for is you can't just go for the simple explanation, because a lot of times it's caused by something else. Positive crankcase ventilation system is supposed to keep pressure from building up in the crankcase. In this case, it wasn't working. As a result, the crankcase was pressurized, and any oil that came streaming down here would be pushed out, because Pascal's law tells us that in a confined space, which is what this was, once the PCV system was blocked off by defective part, in a confined space, the pressure is the same everywhere. So once you get 10 psi or 15 psi or whatever, any oil coming down the side of this cylinder block is going to get pushed out past that gasket, and there's nothing that gasket can do, you know, because the bolts are probably spaced, I don't know, 4 inches apart. Now, it's possible that you can, you know, bang down the little bolt holes where they get deformed and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, you keep tightening these bolts, and eventually you're just going to break down the material that the gasket's made of. It's not going to seal any better because it can't. So it just reminds us that diagnostics is proper diagnostics is paramount, and that's actually, you know, what people get paid for. Now, I saw a video that I would like you to look at sometime. Don't have to do it now, but shoot, let me show you. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I'm starting to be really impressed by how many really good YouTube diagnostic channels there really are. Chuck, you ever seen this guy, Super Mario Diagnostics?
I have to see his face first.
Oh, there he is.
I'm not seeing it.
Yeah,
You
sharp
just
guy.
Good thing.
Sharp guy.
We have the Zoom screen view.
Shoot, really? I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, you're still not seeing it. Oh, how you let me know? Okay, so this goes here, right there. Better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Super Mario. Super Mario Diagnostics is the name of his channel. Sharp guy.
Yeah.
And-
I watched this the other day. It's good.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's a great video. Plus, I mean, it's like the fundamental question of Montclair auto repair, which is to say, are mechanics thieves or is it just incompetence? Because, you know, I get all these cars after the guys in Montclair have run these people out of money, then they bring their cars to me. And I have to look at what these people have done, these mechanics have done, and try to figure out whether they're just incompetent or whether they're deliberately trying to rip these people off. And it's freaking hard to tell. It's really hard to tell. I mean, it's not like something where you can say it's definitely that or that. But, you know, the way he's talking about this video, you'll see the long-term fuel trims. It's obviously not the fuel pump that they were talking about. And what did they want? $2,000 to fix that?
No, something crazy.
To put a fuel pump in it and then do a vacuum test? Yeah. Yeah, it's completely backwards. Completely backwards. And that's, you know, the state of the industry, you know. So that was a good video. I liked it a lot. Super Mario has some very, very interesting, useful videos. And then also there was this guy, you know, South Main Auto Repair, LLC. Another hot channel. This guy is talking about diagnosing a no-code misfire using mode 6 data. That's what we were talking about last time. Hardcore dude. And what he finds is he finds that there's a crack in the spark plug. But I think it's interesting in watching his approach. And this is a no-code misfire, which means it's misfiring, but it's not putting up a check engine light with a diagnostic trouble code, which is, I mean, that's big medicine, right? Yeah, yes, folks, you need to understand that unless you reach a certain threshold of misfires, it's not going to throw a DTC. So anyway, another guy I thought was very interesting, and an interesting approach. I think it's really methodical and well worth study. Let's see. So go back here. Thanks for letting me know about that. There we go. Okay. So something we need to understand about gaskets is we need to understand where they live. Now, certain gaskets you're going to see just kind of as a preventative, but certain gaskets are doing a big job. They need all the help they can get. So we go back here and we see, well, we got paper, we got cork, we got rubberized cork, we got rubber. Now, we don't see rubber gaskets too much because they tend to get dried out over time, especially when they're exposed to heat and oil. And after all, most gaskets we see, we want to
Last.
protect us from fluid leaks, oil leaks. So one thing that's good about rubber, though, although this is actually more of a seal thing. One thing that's good about rubber, let's say it's 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. If you put a lot of force down on this like that, if you squeeze it this way, it's actually going to bulge this way, which can be very useful because if you want to fill up a gap this way, you can just squeeze it that way. You know, it kind of comes out as a torus, you know, like an oval. It's going to come out as a shorter oval, but it's going to be fatter. But if you over compress that, it's going to be a problem. I mean, this is why I don't really like rubber drain plug gaskets, to tell you the truth. We noticed that on vehicles that have rubber drain plug gaskets, if you use them too long, then the rubber just compresses and stays compressed, and then you got a leak. So what I generally do when I get a used car is if the drain plug comes with a rubber gasket, I'm going to get a new drain plug. If it comes with if it comes with a rubber gasket built into the bolt, which many do, I think the Corvettes do, I'm going to get a new bolt, drain plug, drain pan bolt. If I'm going to change the oil, what I usually do is I end up getting a nylon drain plug gasket because I think the nylon does a better job than rubber does. I don't really like rubber drain plug gaskets. I'll use them if I have to, but I'd much prefer nylon. What's nylon? Nylon's a type of soft plastic. It's got pretty good lubricity, which means it doesn't seize up, but it's also soft, so it deforms a lot, and you know I like that in a drain plug gasket. So that's my theory on that. We got to watch out for fluid leaks, not only because people don't like us parking in their driveway when we're dripping oil, but also because dripping oil is kind of asking for it. It's kind of like a ticking time bomb, really. All right, so we talked about paper cork, rubberized cork, rubber, metal gaskets. Now, where are you going to see a metal gasket? I remember seeing them on transmissions and such, but usually because they had grooves cut in them and they would be made of soft metal. Well, why are they made of soft metal? They're made of soft metal so they can deform. One place where you're going to see a metal gasket is on there we go. That's a special type of gasket called a crush gasket. And I guess that's a R45, although I don't think R45 uses gasket. Crush gasket, which is made of aluminum. Now, oh, sorry. That's a spark plug. Two types of spark plugs. There's the type that has the taper seal, and there's the type that has the gasket seal. Makes a big difference too, because once you screw in a spark plug to contact, you only have to turn it a little bit to get it tight. These gaskets, you're going to have to crush this gasket to make sure it seals right. So there's probably goes twice as far after contact. So that's a crush gasket made of aluminum. The reason they call it a crush gasket is because you have to crush it. And in crushing it together, hopefully, theoretically, the aluminum is going to deform, and that's going to create the type of positive seal you need, because remember, you're dealing with significant pressures here. You're dealing with, I mean, what, 200 psi about on the compression stroke, and a lot when it comes to the power stroke. So that's why you can't be putting these out. Taking them out, put them in, taking them out, put them in. Although for vehicles, spark plugs, you shouldn't be taking them out, put them in, taking them out, put them in anyway. I had a big discussion about spark plug service this morning, because the guy was like, well, what my dad does is he gets that little ring thing, and then he opens up the gap on everything, cleans them up, and puts them back in. And like, I mean, it might work on a 40s car, 50s car, but you know, it's got a whole host of associated problems with it. Anyways, that's a metal gasket. We don't see too many metal gaskets, although sometimes we might see them in exhaust manifolds. But let's talk about exhaust manifolds, because that's a type of paper gasket on many cars. All right, so how does it look? Well, I guess the valve cover comes around like this. And then there's going to be a exhaust port. Then it's got a hole right here with some threads in it. Got a hole here with some threads in it. Yeah. Small block Chevy, looks like. And that right there is the exhaust port. And that out of the exhaust port comes smoke that is really, really hot. Really, really hot. Now, coming into that, we have, well, we'll start by drawing the tube, I suppose. Then we come around like this. Sorry. Like that. Like this. That is the exhaust manifold. This is the cylinder head. And of course, down here, there's going to be a bolt. Here you go. Better use hardened bolts on that, folks.
Yeah.
There you go. Lines on the head of the bolt tell us that, well, first of all, it's standard. Second of all, it's a grade 5. Okay, so in between this exhaust port and this exhaust manifold, we're going to have a gasket. And most people are going to do this gasket wrong, which is why I'm going to bring it up here. So we're going to have this gasket, looks like this probably. Okay. That looks like the ghost gasket, right? That's it, right there. Now, the reason I bring up this gasket is because it brings up some important stuff we need to understand when we're discussing gaskets. That gasket could be made of a bunch of different materials. Usually, in my experience, it's going to have a sandwich gasket with a paper in the middle, cardboard, whatever, in the middle, and it's going to have like that stuff they make flame retardant suits out of on the two outsides. And it's going to be, it's not called perforated, quilted. Quilted? I don't know, I suppose it'd be easier just to show you. Got that drawing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, let's go to new tab. There we go. Yeah, it looks like that. Yeah. It's not called quilted, it's called, it's like quilted though. Well, you can see this one, that's a metal gasket. That's a metal gasket. But this has kind of a sandwich to it. Now, here's the thing about that. People say, well, you know, I want to make sure that I don't get any leaks. So what they're going to do is they're going to tighten the hell out of these bolts. Absolutely wrong move. Absolutely wrong move. And here's the reason why. That place right there is one of the hottest places in the engine. I mean, it's got fire coming out of it at all times. And what's going to happen is all that metal, that exhaust manifold, it's going to expand. And the bolts are going to expand, yeah, but the exhaust manifold's probably going to expand more. And if you're not careful, what's going to happen is it's going to break the freaking bolt. And when it breaks the bolt, a lot of times that thread is going to get stuck inside that hole. And if it does, the only way to get it out, because it's usually a very hard to hold to access, the only way to get it out, like on a 87 Ford F-250 with a 460 engine, the only way to get it out is to laser it out. And that's a lot of money. So folks, do yourself a favor and do not over tighten these bolts. If you got an exhaust manifold leak, fix it. Fix it the right way. But don't just think you can just over tighten these bolts, because given the situation it's in, you got to rely on the gasket to do the sealing. You can't rely on just tightening it, tightening. Similarly, just like that oil pan, you can't just keep tightening that oil pan gasket and think it's going to survive, because it's not. It'll split. So, as you can see, there's a bunch of different configurations of exhaust manifold gaskets. Small block Chevys right there. Okay, Chuck, are you going to put in your exhaust manifold gaskets dry?
I do.
Really?
I never add any type of high temp RVT on there.
Oh, no.
I put them on dry, and I usually put new copper bolts if they require it, or nuts, you know, or I have to replace a stud. or replace the studs depending on how the threads look. You know, it depends. If it's my car or somebody else's, it depends.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Right here, you got a paper gasket. Something tells me it's treated, though. Right here, you got a metal gasket because I guess they figure it's going to get so hot that, you know, paper would just get wrecked. I have seen a theory, and I kind of believe it, that unless there's a good reason not to, I like to put anti-seize on my gaskets. And the reason is, let me go back and I'll show you. You know, everything expands when it gets hot. There we go. Everything expands when it gets hot. So let me ask you a question. Here's a small block Chevy for you. Got one there. Got two there. Got one there. Not uncommon configuration for a small block Chevy. That one's a dual. Okay. Everything expands when it gets hot, right? Let me ask you a question. This thing's going to get hot because that's an exhaust manifold. What's going to happen between what's going to happen to the distance between that hole and this hole?
Wider.
It's going to get longer. And if you have those bolts tightened down like a son of a gun, I believe you're either going to A, crack the exhaust manifold, or it's going to break the heads off the bolts. I'm paranoid about this now, right? Because a lot of times you'll check the exhaust manifold bolts just for fun when the engine's cold, and you'll say, man, these seem way too loose. I'm going to come in and I'm going to tighten these down before I have a problem. Well, yeah, you tighten them down, you're going to have a problem. Because the simple fact of the matter is, what have I seen? This could be, what, an eighth of an inch longer? Now, we have someone in this room who actually had a cracked exhaust manifold. One of the things that makes me nervous is cracked exhaust manifolds caused by the fact that we've tightened down these bolts too much. How do we tighten down the bolts too much? Because the last person that did the work came in here with an impact and thought that the key to having good gasket life on this was to tighten the hell out of it. It's not. This thing the exhaust manifold has to be able to shift underneath the bolt heads, which is why what I do is I'm going to put anti-seize on my exhaust manifold gaskets so that when the exhaust manifold starts doing this, it can slide easily on my exhaust manifold gaskets instead of tearing them, which is what they're going to do if they're dry.
Oh,
I
cool.
suppose you could use a torque wrench, but you know how I feel about that. No, you should. You're supposed to use a torque wrench, but most people don't. Most people are just going to use an air ratchet, and they're going to get it way tight because they're going to say, well, you know, it's a 3/8 bolt. I got to get this thing tight. No, you don't. No, you don't. You got to get it tight enough, but you don't want that thing tight because the simple fact of the matter is you're dealing with so much heat, it's going to get longer, and it's also going to get wider. Yeah, Chuck.
When you met, that's a new trick that I'm picking up on the anti-seize. Are we putting anti-seize on both sides of the gasket or just one side? You actually coating the gasket surface with anti-seize?
Well, usually I just put it on one because otherwise it gets too messy.
Right.
But yeah, I could get, I mean, either way. No, I'll put it this way. The cylinder head, okay, well, let me ask you a question. If I'm bolting a cast iron exhaust manifold to an aluminum cylinder head, do those two materials expand at the same rate?
No.
No. The aluminum is going to expand 3 times as fast.
Okay.
As a result, if I don't have some kind of lubrication, I'm going to end up tearing the gaskets. In fact, this is what we found with back in the day when we used to put aluminum heads on cast iron blocks. We used to find the head gaskets would never last. because aluminum expands 3 times as fast as cast iron does. So what happened is the head's going whoop and the block's going meh. And as a result, all that stress was going through the gasket, and basically it just ends up, I mean, one end of the gasket is got to expand, the other end of the gasket does a little. So as a result, the gasket's it's doing this every time you heat up the engine. And sure enough, that's going to destroy the head gasket. That's why manufacturers quit doing it that way, really. Except in the LS motors, and somehow they figured out how to make the LS motor last like that. But, well, no, I don't know. Do they put aluminum heads on the cast iron LS motors? I'm not sure. I think all LS heads are aluminum, aren't they? Anyways, I know that in general, the manufacturers, that's why they went to aluminum blocks, even though, you know, aluminum blocks got their own problems. For instance, you want to run cast iron liners inside the aluminum blocks just so that the ring, you know, the cylinders will last. All right, so that's my theory on all of these exhaust gaskets. I'm going to put anti-seize on them just because I think the level of expansion is going to go crazy on them. If someone can tell me a reason not to,
Can I ask you a question? It's probably a dumb one.
You just did.
Thank you. Yeah, I did. Is the anti-seize stuff the same stuff you put on brakes?
Yep, the silver stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wondered.
That's why I say, I mean, you get yourself a bottle of anti-seize, you're going to find yourself using it all kinds of times, and if you don't have it, you're going to probably put something together in a less than happy way, you know, because you're not going to, you know, get all dressed up and go down to the store just for buy a bottle of anti-seize for 1 bolt or 2 bolts, but you probably should. So that's my theory about that. Now, head gasket is a sandwich gasket. Head gasket is a sandwich gasket, which means it's got a bunch of different layers to it. And the reason it has a bunch of different layers, I'll bet you that's how they did the aluminum head with the cast iron block. Head gasket's got a whole bunch of different layers to it. And one of the reasons is for differential expansion. But another one of the reasons is because we're dealing with different forces, right? We've got oil going through the head, we've got coolant going through the head, and we've got combustion gases going through the head. So, you know, combustion gases are pretty acidic. And the problem is that's going to eat through a head gasket if it's not made of sturdy stuff. Coolant, if you don't change it, ethylene glycol, is really acidic. So if you don't change it, it's going to eat through head gaskets. So what the manufacturers have had to do in order to get good life out of their head gaskets is they had to build these sandwich gaskets, which are basically comprised of at least 3 layers of different materials so that they will retain flexibility without losing too much in the way of strength, maintaining the seals. And it allows them to, you know, custom make the gasket. Let me show you, because head gasket's one of my favorite gaskets just because so intricate, so bitchy. Let's see. Who makes the best gasket?
Velcro,
How do you know?
because I listen.
I mean, look, you know that's a bitchin' head gasket. Come on now, you know, that's a bitchin' head gasket, right? You can tell it's got the sealer already on it. See, these are oil passages, coolant passages, stuff like that. It's already got the sealer on it, so you don't have to put sealer on it. You know how I put on head gaskets, Chuck Reyna? Exactly how the manufacturer says to do it, to a T. Yeah, because I'm scared about head gaskets. Head gaskets scare the hell out of me, which is why I'm gonna go to church first, and then I'm going to put on the head gasket.
Amen.
Yeah. Now, Felpro, everybody knows Felpro's bitching. Incidentally, Felpro, if you want to send me a bunch of free stuff because everyone else is doing it. Why can't I? You can see that this head gasket has already been sprayed with like a RTV spray. So when you put this in, what it's going to do is it's going to melt all that RTV and kind of like make a bitchin' seal. Just beautiful, beautiful, insanely beautiful gaskets. Really, really top of the line. See, it's got metal in between all the cylinders. Now, this one's cool because look, it's got this cylinder all the way. It's got this, what would you call that? A metal lining. I guess it's made of an aluminum alloy. So it's really strong. Just beautiful gasket. Just a sensational, beautiful gasket. I mean, you take out a Philbrook, you're looking at this gasket. It's like a work of art.
Kind of is.
It really is, right? I mean, mechanical
One
arts,
question,
right?
Mr. Rockcliffe.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of relating back to hardware since we're talking about gaskets. What's your preference on stretch to yield bolts or ARP bolts or head studs?
Okay, here's the thing. If you use head studs, it's going to stress the block differently, which means you're supposed to bore the block with a head plate, bore plate. Stress to yield bolts, I mean, that's a matter of application, right? ARP makes great bolts, but geez, they're expensive. You know, the question is, do you need them? I mean, if you're not using a supercharger, do you need them?
Well, I'm talking about, we're talking about making putting the best gasket on and doing all the specs and torque exactly right. I never liked stretch to yield bolts, but again, that's just me.
Well, yeah, because they're single use, right?
Right.
Okay, what Chuck's talking about is every time you use a bolt, well, okay, what makes a bolt tight is the fact that it stretches. It actually gets longer in length. And that's what locks it in and keeps it from backing out. Well, there's a special type of bolt called a stress to yield bolt, which means that instead of turning it to 65 foot-pounds, now we turn it to like 35 foot-pounds, and then we go another 90 degrees, 45 degrees, something like that.
Yeah.
Problem is you can't reuse those bolts. They found that it gives you a more consistent torque value, because one of the problems you have with a torque wrench is, well, are the threads dry? Are they lubricated? Did you clean all the threads before you put the bolt in? Blah, 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 blah. So they found that the stretch to yield bolts give you a more consistent torque, which is going to give you a more uniform sealing. Problem is you can't use them twice. And you gotta get a little tool. Oh, that's weird. Boy, it's all about Velcro, isn't it? And you can see like all their head gaskets look different because they're awesome. Is that a flathead? That's a flathead.
Yeah, that's flathead Ford.
Look at that.
That's
The cylinder head gasket? Yeah, I guess boxer motor, huh?
Yeah. Subaru.
Oh yeah, small block Chevy, and they give you new head gasket. Oh yeah. Don't forget that. These bolts go into the water jacket, so you got to put sealer on them. Otherwise, you end up getting water in your oil, and you're like, oh no, I blew my head gasket. No, just get in there, put some sealer on the threads, and do it again. Change your oil. That's funny. Well, there's ARP. You know how Chuck loves that ARP stuff. I mean, what's not to love, but. So that's my theory on that. Just beautiful. Just beautiful. And like I said, this blue stuff is actually like spray RTV, so it really seals up nice. I've never had a failure with a Felpro head gasket. You hear that, Felpro? And here's the whole set right here. Got intake manifold, exhaust manifold, valve covers, head gasket. I guess that's a plenum. Full set. Felpro, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you know, if you're buying cheap gaskets, usually you're going to have a failure that makes you wish you had not bought cheap gaskets. Like I've got a video on my channel about buying a cheap radiator off of eBay, and it just sucked. It just sucked, and it didn't work good. I wouldn't have minded if it sucked if it worked good, but it didn't. So, lo barato sale caro. That's what my abuelita used to say. All right, you had enough of that? Yeah, I think we had enough of that. Just beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. It's nice to have good quality stuff sometimes. All right, right there. So what I'm saying is we got to keep in mind where we're at. You know, this right here is going to be called a flange gasket down here. That's where
A
it
what?
hooks up to the a flange gasket.
Okay, thank you.
That's going to hook up to the exhaust pipe. Well, the pipe going to the catalytic converter.
Those things always break, those studs.
Yeah. Why?
Over tight, you know.
Over tightening them. Yeah. Why are people over tightening them? Because they just think in their heads, you know, I got to tighten this really good. That way it won't leak. Well, no, you got to trust the gasket on that. Because if you over tighten them, it's going to stretch the bolt and probably break it. Plus, I got to tell you, it's in a very hot environment, which means if there's any lubrication on those threads at all, it's all going to boil off. So as a result, they tend to get rusty, which is probably another place you want to use anti-seize. Do something to protect the thread-to-thread contact, because otherwise it just basically cooks itself together. And folks, do me a solid and use penetrating oil. PB Blaster. PB Blaster, if you want to send me a sample pack, address is in the space bar. PB Blaster, don't try to take those nuts off dry. Just don't, because you might get lucky, but you probably won't. And when you don't, you know, I had an SS Camaro come in. Guy wanted us to replace the trans. Sure enough, you have to take down the exhaust, you know, system to do that. And we broke like 4 bolts out of 6.
Thanks.
And most of those bolts, it's like, how the hell are you going to get this out of here? Are you know, and I got a bunch of students. I got a bunch of 15, 17-year-olds trying to drill a bolt out that's already been welded in there. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could do it myself 40 years ago. I could do it myself, but having students do it, yeah, that was bad. That was bad, okay? So that's my theory about that. A little gasket action for you. So folks, I'm going to strongly suggest using a torque wrench. And here, if any place, you're going to want to start thinking about maybe using a 1/4-inch drive torque wrench. Here's the good thing about 1/4-inch drive torque wrenches. They're cheap on eBay. You know why? Because nobody understands the use for them. But what they're good for is they're good for, you know, valve bodies and pan gaskets, stuff like that, stuff that doesn't get tightened very much. Because most of them are good for what, 200 inch-pounds? 200 inch-pounds is 16 foot-pounds. Yeah. Remember, a torque wrench is primarily accurate in the middle of its reading, in the middle of its range. So the problem is, if you get a torque wrench that does like 15 to 75, if you're doing 10 or 70 or 20 on it, 10, 15, 20 on it, it's not going to be spectacularly accurate. I might want to still use it, but it's not going to be spectacularly accurate. And one of the problems, you know, if we go back here, one of the problems you're going to have is that this is very thin sheet metal. And if you're not careful, you're going to distort the sheet metal, and then it's basically going to go like this. And when it does that, you're going to get leak here, leak here. All right, so let me tell you what I would do. Let me tell you what I do. Well, they used to call it Permatex 2B. That's what they used to call it. I have never had a failure with Permatex 2B in 40. Do I have 45 years? No. 42 years. Yeah, 42 years in this industry. I've never had a failure with Permatex 2B, but they don't call it Permatex 2B anymore. So let me find out what they call it. Now, I got to tell you, 42 years without one failure, that's freaking good. Permatex 2B. I'm going to say, sorry, we don't make that anymore. Well, that's what it was.
Oh, I got some of that at a thrift store.
Really?
Yeah, they bought it.
I didn't know they made it anymore.
Well, I was at a thrift store, so somebody must have had it and then just gave it away, you know?
Huh. I need to go to a thrift store like that. They got like
Yeah.
all old Chevy parts. Protex 2B, that's the stuff right there. Don't get 2A. 2A is hardening. Oh, that says non-hardening. 2B is non-hardening. Non-hardening is important. You want to get the non-hardening stuff. And the reason you want to get the non-hardening stuff, what's 2BR? Huh? I don't know, they sell that in America? 2B right there. That looks very used. Try that. Okay. You want to get the non-hardening, and the reason you want to get the non-hardening is because once your gasket sealer hardens, now when you get the expansion contraction with heat, now you're going to find out that one side of your gasket is going to stick and the other side of the gasket is going to move, and that's bad. So expansion contraction. The reason you want the non-hardening stuff is so that as you expand and contract, it's going to actually flex. And that's going to allow you to maintain the seal. I'm going to use Permatex 2B on pipe plugs. I'm going to use it on one side of a pan gasket. Which side? The pan side. Yeah. I'm going to put it on the pan side of the pan gasket. And then I'm going to put the gasket on top of the pan like the automatic transmission fluid pan. And that's also going to keep the gasket stuck to the top of the pan, so it makes it easier to put up. A lot of times what I'll do is well, first thing, you want to rehab the pan. So you got that part number? Here's what you don't want to use. Everybody uses RTV, but the problem is RTV dries hard. And when it dries hard and it can't flex adequately, what it does is it rips apart from the surface, and now you've got a place for oil to come through. Unless you get the really, really good stuff. Don't get the cheap stuff. RTV is a lot better than it used to be, ain't it? It used to be freaking horrible. Oh, that's right. Okay, the hardening stuff is 1B. My bad. Yeah, see it says fast drying, hard setting. I've never seen a use for that unless you're doing something permanently and you think it's going to be there forever, which is a bad way to bet. So on my pan gaskets, remember the gasket itself is one thing, but the proper installation is another. So don't buy 1B. Sorry, Permatex. Don't send me any because I won't use it. But I'm going to use 1B right. Well, there's aviation stuff right there. See, even they want to use non-hardening, especially that's expensive though. Number 3.
Question, Mr. Roca.
What?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
On regards to the RVT or the gasket sealer, for example, when you put in an intake manifold, usually you have to put a little bit of silicone between the gasket, you know, the head and the, let's say the front or the rear of the block, you know, where it meets. That little point right there.
Yeah.
What sealer do we use then?
Okay, that's different because that is taking up space, right?
Correct.
Yeah, now 2B will not take up space because it's going to remain soft. So in that case, I'm going to use RTV, but I'm going to use the absolute best RTV I can get, you know, the expensive stuff, not the cheap stuff. Yeah. Because what Chuck's talking about is like where the intake manifold makes a corner, or better example is when you're putting a valve cover on a single overhead cam or a dual overhead cam head.
All right.
Right in the corner, I'm going to put a big old blob of RTV, but I'm going to use the best quality RTV I can get. The expensive pro stuff, not the civilian stuff. Because I've had too many failures with the civilian stuff. And the worst part about the civilian stuff is that, number one, a lot of it gases off and then it kills your oxygen sensor. But the worst part is with the civilian stuff, that if any of that ever comes loose in your engine, it's going to go down to your oil pump pickup and it's going to stick onto the screen of your oil pump pickup. And if you get enough in there, it's going to starve your engine of oil and freaking break your engine. So I'm going to use the primo super professional stuff that costs a lot. Unfortunately, you know, I'm only going to use probably quarter of it, and then it's going to get old because I don't use it that much. But yeah, when you're buying RTV, it pays to buy the good stuff. Quack. There you go. Buy the expensive stuff, the stuff that doesn't look like civilians use it. It's gonna be expensive though.
Like how expensive?
Probably twice as expensive. But that's okay, because remember, what's the expensive part of replacing an intake manifold? It's not the parts, it's the freaking labor, especially if you have to do it twice. So,
Yeah.
you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to CarQuest and I'm going to talk to those dudes and I'm going to say, hey, what's new and beautiful, right? Because they're the ones that are going to keep up on the latest developments, right? Or I'm just going to come in with a trowel and use this stuff right here. That was a joke. That's right here. Okay, RTV stands for room temperature vulcanizing, which means that it's going to get hard at room temperature. That was a amazing advance for us in the world of sealers. Problem is, everybody wants to use RTV for everything. That's incorrect, because like I said, the problem is RTV will stick to the surface, but if you've got a lot of heating and contraction, it will lose the adhesive on one side. Now all of a sudden you got a leak. That's why I use the 2B, because it stays sticky, but you can't fill up a large surface with it. I wonder, Chuck, that's interesting. Now that you bring it up, let's see if I can find RTV at the corner of CAN towers. No, they're not going to make me happy. That would be so perfect too. Oh yeah, there it is right there. See? This is why you pay the big bucks, folks. Okay, right here. Oh, that's Detroit Diesel. You got a valve cover that goes right here. That's a cam shaft right there. This thing right here is called a cam tower. It's the actual top cap that holds the camshaft onto the head. Well, you need to come in here in the corner with some RTV and lay it on there pretty thick. Problem is, if you lay it on there too thick and you're using cheap RTV and this little piece of RTV comes loose, it's headed for your oil pump pickup and it wants it bad. So many's the time, I have to tell you, many's the time I've seen people use RTV for oil pan gaskets, and then it gets hot and it's expanding, contracting, and it comes off in little strips and it heads straight for your oil pump pickup, and it basically covers your oil pump pickup and it starves it of oil and destroys the engine.
Wow.
I'm terrified of RTV. This right here is one of the few places I would actually use it. Now, same thing for the corners on intake manifolds. I would probably use it in the corners, but around the water jackets, I still like to use my good old Permatex 2B. I do. Fortunately, many gaskets now come with their own seals, but I'll still hit Permatex 2B with it. A lot of it is judgment call, but I got to tell you, early RTV was so terrible that we had so many failures with it that it really turned me off to RTV. So I would not use weird off-brand RTV ever. Typically, I'm going to use RTV just to fill up spaces. Now, Chuck, I got to tell you, I think I told you before that General Motors come on now. General Motors actually tells you in their manual that after you change an intake manifold, you're supposed to dump 2 bottles of this stuff into the cooling system. Now, people always laugh at good old Rocliffe because, you know, Rocliffe's so old fool from the old school, right? So, you know, because everybody knows all this is powdered aluminum, and if you pour powdered aluminum into your cooling system, it will stand to clog your radiator. Well, yeah, that's why you're going to follow the instructions exactly when you use this. You're going to follow the instructions exactly. But General Motors actually requires their General Motors technicians doing General Motors dealer work to dump 2 of these into the cooling system, because they realize that aluminum parts like aluminum heads and head gaskets, well, mostly aluminum heads in this case, they realize that when the coolant turns acidic, it starts to attack the aluminum. They also realize that if you have, say, cast iron touching aluminum, that you're going to create a dielectric union, which is going to start to corrode the aluminum because the aluminum is the softer metal. So just in general, they're going to tell you dump 2 of those in, and that's from the factory telling us to do that. So Chuck, while we're on this topic, how do you feel about this stop leak stuff?
I've never used it. Usually I use that,
Pepper?
the radiator, you add to your radiator. It's that pink stuff, red line, to stop that. You talk about the electrical discharge of the water pump impeller. I have a bottle of it somewhere right here.
No, I'm talking about this stuff. Now, folks, I got to tell you, here's something you might want to think about. This stuff is for radiators and heater cores. Now, I don't know about using this stuff to stop a radiator leak. I'm suspicious of it because I'm not convinced that a radiator leak is hard enough to fix to where you would want to take the risk that this involves. Because, you know, cooling systems will always let you down at the worst possible moment. But if you have to get home and you've got a truck full of gold bars and you can't leave it at the side of the road, sure, I'd go ahead and use this. But I'll tell you one thing, if you look at this right here, it says radiator and heater core. Now the heater core is made of soft aluminum, and it's located deep in the bowels of your dashboard. And I know that on like a Mercedes, it's like 6 hours to get the heater core out, and then you have to put it all back together. And if you get one thing wrong, you get to take the whole thing apart again. You know what? I hate to tell you, but Papa Rocliffe, before he starts that job, you know what he's going to do? He's going to get his little booty down to the store, and he's going to get him a bottle of this, and he's going to make sure nobody's looking, and then dump it in there and hope it fixes it. Because after all, if it fixes it, I'll be the happiest guy in freaking Laverne. Yes, I will. Yes, I will. Now, is that a bogus repair? Well, not if it works. I mean, if your heater core, okay, what is the heater core used for? Heater core is used for your heater, and that's also used for your defroster. It is important, but if this repair fails, it's just going to dump coolant on my passenger side floorboard. I'm not going to use this on a freeze plug leak, and I'm not going to use it on a radiator leak, because after all, if those things fail, then you run the engine, you know, dry, and that's no good. So it's just a thought, folks. I mean, we got to really ask ourselves, do you really want to take your car down to the most expensive mechanic in town, who's probably the only one you can trust, every time it has a little bitty problem? Or is, you know, I mean, if I had, you know, a $60,000 car and then I might think differently of it. But most of us, we're just, working people trying to get to work. And if this gets us an extra month, if it gets us a year, if it gets us to, I mean, it's theoretically possible this could get us until we sell the car or get hit by a bus or whatever. Some cars, it's easy to change the heater core. Sometimes, some cars, it's a freaking nightmare. I mean, let's say you made the mistake of buying a European import. So now you got a, I don't know, 98 Mercedes. Do you really want to spend, $1,500, $2,000 to get the heater core out? God knows what the heater core is going to cost. I'm going to try that first. That's just me. I mean, sorry. Practical solutions. I mean, there's a difference between doing it professionally and doing it for yourself, right? And there's also a difference between I got to get this car home because I'm stuck in Winslow, Arizona, and I got to get home, Anyways, it's not pretty, but if it works, then I guess it wasn't so stupid after all. Now, what destroyed your cooling system? Now, we know what destroys your brake system. What destroys your brake system is water in the system, right? Because that's going to cause rust, and the water gets in there because brake fluid's hygroscopic. It's going to attract all that water, and then the water's just going to attack every part of your brake system. Okay, so we know what kills brake systems. That's why as soon as we get a new used car, we're going to replace all the brake fluid so that we may not be able to stop the damage that's already there, but at least we can stop it from getting worse. What kills your freeze plugs? What causes holes in your radiator? All that stuff. What causes that? Well,
Can I chime in?
please.
I have two thoughts. One is, well, three actually. First one is poor maintenance. Second one is running without antifreeze. You got rust. Or the third one is that antifreeze, the phosphates, turn acidic and it's eating up the aluminum.
Which is basically three ways of saying the same thing, right?
Right.
Right? Okay, folks, you're supposed to change your coolant, what, every 2 years? Guess how many people I know in 57 trips around the sun? Guess how many people I know who have changed their coolant every 2 years? Starts with a Z, and it's not Z06. Yeah, nobody does that, but they should. Now, the new stuff is not going to turn acidic as fast as the old stuff, but it's still going to turn acidic. Look, your coolant it starts out bright, and if you look at your coolant and it looks like olive drab, you got to get that changed. Now, if my good friend Gerardo Flores was here, he could tell us how much it would cost to have our coolant flushed, because what you don't want to do, I don't think, what most people do, there's a drain cock on the bottom of the radiator. So what they do is they open up the drain cock, and of course they pour all that coolant right down the gutter. But even if they don't, they put it in a pan or whatever, and they take it back, which is what you're supposed to do. But the problem is that's not going to get it out of the engine. There's a whole bunch of coolant still stuck in the engine. So what happens is if you do it that way, then when you mix all your fresh coolant with all that old coolant, you'll be better, but it'll still be 30% suck. So the correct way to do this is to actually bite the bullet, take it down to one of these quick oil change places, and have them do the coolant flush. And that should get you, basically new coolant. And then, knowing me, probably never change the coolant again. But at least that would stop the destruction. Now, it gets hard because, like my 92 Ford F-250, I lost 2 or 3 freeze plugs on that. And that was bad. They had to do some major surgery to get the freaking freeze plugs out and get the freeze plugs back in. What's a freeze plug? It's a plug on the side of the block. You'll see. Well, that's what they look like. I'll tell you, the brass ones are better. Oh, come on, Chuck. What kind of sealant did they use on those brass freeze plugs, Chuck? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, your 2B.
Permatex 2B is correct. Yep. Okay, so right here is the cylinder block. And right here are basically freeze plugs, core plugs. They're there because this is a cast block, and that's how they get the sand out after they cast it. That comprises where the water passages are. So every block's going to have these, I think, pretty sure. And the stock freeze plugs are going to be made of steel. Well, steel's got a problem. Steel in the presence of water is going to tend to rust.
Rust.
Now these are zinc coated, which is cool, but we know that the zinc coating is going to wear off eventually, and then it just turns into steel. It's like the enamel on your teeth. Once the enamel's gone, I mean, acid gets in there and just destroys the actual tooth itself. Which is why a bunch of cool people, when they put freeze plugs back in, they put in brass. And that way they don't have the problem with rust anymore. And they put it in with that beautiful, beautiful Permatex 2B. Permatex, my address is found in the, yep. That's what I would do. Now, brass freeze plugs, they are going to cost you a little more, but you know what? We're only doing this job once, right? 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 We're only doing this job once. Look at that Permatex 2B. Man, that's the stuff right there. Oh, no, thank you. That's it right there. See that hole right there? That comes from not changing your coolant, letting your coolant become acidic, or, as Chuck says, using water instead of antifreeze. Now, why? Because antifreeze has anti-rust and corrosion inhibitors, stuff like that. Now, I'll give you a little player's tip because this is what you pay the big bucks for. If you're looking at a car, a used car, and then the engine's not hot yet, do yourself a favor and take the radiator cap off. Make sure you put it back on correctly, but take the radiator cap off. See what the coolant looks like. If they're running water for a reason, and it's because this thing loses coolant. And if it's losing coolant, it's probably losing coolant because it's got a bad head gasket. And they may scream up and down. They may have just got the engine re-detailed. Yeah, to hide the fact that it had, you know, orange stains all over it. If they're using water as a coolant, there's a reason. And that's because they have to keep replacing it. So run, run, run. Yeah. Now, you be nice and you be sure to use the correct installer when you're putting freeze plugs in. Don't be banging them things in with a hammer. That's no good. This guy made his own. But that's the actual correct tool. That right there is a ball peen hammer, so that's also the correct tool. But oh, gee wizards. Yeah, look at all that rust behind the freeze plug. How did it get that way? Well, that's what happens when you run water. That's what happens when you let your coolant become acidic. How did it become acidic? Well, there's a big hole right there. See that? That's what happens. I mean, they're made of sheet metal, so if they just get thin enough, I mean, your coolant's under 15 pounds of pressure, so eventually it will blast through a thin freeze plug. Now, this is typically how you get to change freeze plugs. I believe this is a picture looking up, isn't it? How are you going to get that? Well, getting it out isn't so hard. Getting the new one in, yeah, that could be a challenge. Incidentally, while we're on this topic, see if I can shame my good friend Chuck. How about oh, there it is. There it is. There it is. Now, if you find yourself where you're incapable of putting in the correct freeze plug because maybe there's a frame rail in the way or something like that, this is what most people use. It's called an expandable freeze plug. And what you do is you come in here and you stick it in the hole, and then you start tightening this nut, and it's going to make this rubber squeeze like we talked about earlier, and it's going to squeeze out like this against the walls of the block. So not the right way to do it. But perfection is the enemy of the good. I'll tell you one thing, if I was on the side of the road in Winslow, Arizona, I would use one of these in a heartbeat. But I mean, the failure rate on these is astronomical, as you can imagine. Yeah, try using that one. Tell you what, try using that one with a freaking nylon wing nut on it. Winterizing expansion. So what's that mean? So they just put it here. So when the water in the block freezes, it pops this thing out instead of popping out your normal freeze plugs or cracking your block. No, you're not. Yes, this is actually in a book of how to do it. Oh, and they're using 3 of them. That's nice. Good gravy. Yeah, that's how they're teaching people to do it. Anyways, yeah, don't put these in dry. I mean, see, a little sealer. Make you a happy guy. But as I say, this to me, this is the last resort. But you know, desperation makes people do strange things. Can't wait to get back in the shop. So, Permatex 2B. Now, as I say, if I'm doing an automatic transmission pan, I'm going to rehab the pan first. Do I have time? I wonder if I can find that. No, doggone it. I could show you in a second, but I don't have the stuff, so I don't think I can make a drawing that's going to work good. I don't want to mess you up. So, in sum, what I want to say is proper chemical use is key to success. Key to success. Yeah, Chuck, you believe that?
Oh yeah, I tightened up my game by doing the proper cleanup and
Right.
right material, gasket sealer, and torque specs.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, it makes even the lowly look super pro-ly, right? You end up getting pro level results, even if you know you're just watching YouTube videos, just by, you know, Chuck's not, but I'm just saying, you can get pro level results just by using the right chemicals the right way, the right amount. Yeah, because what we see primarily in this industry is people that don't understand the proper chemicals. So they're either using the wrong chemicals or they're not using chemicals. And then they're having all these failures and they're too ignorant about the right way to do it to realize that they caused the failure. So then they do it again the exact same way and they cause another failure. That's why you should watch the Super Mario Diagnostics video on incompetent or thieves, because what you're going to find is maybe 50% of all the auto repair that goes on in Montclair is fixing problems that were created by other technicians. I hate to say it, that's my industry. And you know what? That's what drags down wages for all of us, because the people who are doing hardcore diagnostics like Super Mario, Scanner Danner, you know, people like that, the people who are doing hardcore diagnostics deserve to get paid way more than they're getting paid. But the problem is when people think of mechanic, they think of the jackass, you know, down the street. And they say, well, he does the same job you do. No. It's a completely different job. It's like me throwing a football versus Tom Brady, right? So I mean, yeah, well, you're both playing games, right? Nah, that's not, or not, no, that ain't, no. So anyways, proper chemical use and understanding of how to do it, when to do it, where to do it. And just like Chuck said, get that torque wrench, you know, do yourself a favor and get that torque wrench and use it correctly. I mean, now you've got all the specifications at your fingertips, so you can get in there and you've got the tools. That's, you know, the surface information is one of the most important tools. So now get in there with the appropriate hand tools and make great things happen. Well, it's 7:30, folks, so I'll meet you at 7:45.
Okie dokie.
All right, I appreciate it, and I'll come in here and pause recording. Big ups. So here's all there is to pan rehab. All that I can show you with a pan, I mean, like I said, I could show you with 2 ball peen hammers and a socket and an extension in like 15 seconds, and you'd say, yeah, I get it, but this is going to be the hard way. When you have a pan where the pan bolts go, always gets deformed like this. Because where the bolt goes, the head is going to be creating pressure. I'll just put the bolt there so you'll understand what I'm talking about. Pan comes down like this, whatever. So everywhere there's a bolt, this surface is going to tend to get deformed. So what you want to do is you want to come in before you put the pan back on. You want to come in here with a ball peen hammer and flatten this surface back out. Now there's a right way to do it that involves putting an extension. Are you listening, Chuck? Because
Yes, Nick. Yes.
if you don't know this, this will help a great deal.
Okay.
You get yourself a you probably already know it though. Get like a 9-inch 3/8 extension. Put a deep socket about a 1/2 inch, maybe 9/16 on it, and then you put the hole here right over the hole in the socket. Then you turn the ball peen hammer upside down like that. Put the pan in between, and then you hit this with another ball peen hammer. And what it'll do is it'll actually attack the deformation itself, which is the only way you're going to be able to flatten this out. Because if you just hit it with a hammer, ain't going to do it. So you put this in a vise. I end up doing it anyway. End up drawing it anyway. You put the 9-inch 3/8 drive extension in the vise. You put the deep socket in it about 9/16, maybe 1/2 inch, whatever fits in the pan rail. Then you put the pan in there, and then where the hole is, you turn the ball peen hammer upside down. So this is inside the hole, and then you bang on this with another hammer, and what it's going to do is it's going to take out all this deformation, which is what you want to do before you put the new pan gasket in. Because if you don't, it's just going to leak because it's going to be tight here, but it's going to be loose everywhere else. You ever seen that, Chuck?
Yeah, that's cool.
Of course you already seen it. But anyways, like I said, I could show it to you in freaking 45 seconds if we were in the shop and everyone would go, oh, okay, I get it. But now you look at the drawing and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? So you need to get back sooner, right? Mass intentions.
Coming.
So next page. Here's what we got to do. We got to talk about thread repair. I don't think I've ever talked about thread repair in this class, so should be a treat for everybody. Well, what's a thread?
Like the little grooves on the bolts or whatever.
Yep, it's the little lines on the bolts. Basically, it's a continuous inclined plane, which is a ancient form of machine, right? It's a wedge. Well, this right here is the threads. Threads on a bolt. This is like what I started with. But there's different types of threads, and there's different sizes of threads. First of all, there's standard, which is fractions of an inch. So that's going to be, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 9/16, whatever, 3/4. And then there's going to be metric, which is going to be 10 millimeter, 14 millimeter, 18 millimeter. Now, here's the problem. When it comes to bolts, you don't describe them by the size of the tool that you use. For instance, a 3/8 bolt uses a 9/16 wrench. So you got to be careful about that, or you're going to end up ordering the wrong parts. Same thing's true in metric. We don't do it by the size of the tool we use. It's based on the bolt diameter. So that makes it hard usually. That's why it's good to have one of those little cards. You know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
That one right here.
One of those little plastic. Yeah, could you show it so I don't have to look for it, please? If it's not too hard to get to.
Right there.
Oh, but I can't see you. Oh, yeah, one of those. And what that's going to do, folks, is that's going to enable you to find out what thread the fastener you're working on is actually, and whether it's metric or standard. Now, there's ways of figuring out metric or standard on most fasteners, but not necessarily all of them. So,
Can you guys see that?
What's
Yeah.
that? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, see, it's got all the different tooth sizes so that you can find different threads and different pitches, because that's what we have to talk about next. Okay, so the first thing we have to understand is this a standard fastener or is this a metric fastener? Now, I'll give you a little I'll give you some good news if you don't mind.
Okay.
I'll give you some good news and you'll be happy to hear it. And I'll be happy to tell it. Okay, see this? I can't. Oh, okay. Let me look. Because I got too excited about Chuck's thing and now I've lost my, there we go. Okay, so you're like, damn, that guy's not a hoarder at all. Okay, see that?
Mhm.
That's called the Ace Superset. Now, Ace, that's American made stuff, but it's like 50 or 60 years old. As you can see, though, the set is complete. And it's got the little thread analyzer that Chuck had, except mine's made of metal. And it's got these things, which are for cutting threads in holes. Those are called taps. And these are for cutting threads on shafts, and those are called dies. Man, this is a great camera. In here we have a tap handle with more taps, and we've got more dies in the back. As you can see, we're missing one. But the Ace Superset is a good deal. If you can get it, because it's good quality tools. American made, old stuff. Now, you're going to find a lot of this stuff in the pawn shop. You know why you're going to find a lot of this stuff in the pawn shop? Because nobody does this kind of work anymore. Just like micrometers. I used to get micrometers for $5 a piece out of the pawn shop, like good American made ones, because nobody uses them anymore. Nobody knows how. Everybody's too busy playing Fortnite. So that's the good news, is you can get this stuff really, really cheap. Pawn shops and stuff like that. So whatever it is, be sure to offer them very little. Now, if you get cheap stuff, I can think of a lot of places where getting cheap tools is not so bad. But when it comes to tap and dies, that's the absolute worst place to get cheap stuff. Because if you're tapping a hole and the tap breaks, now you have gone to like the 7th circle of hell. So it's really, really bad. Don't use cheap tap and dies. If you have to buy a used good set, buy a used good set. That's better than buying a new cheap set, because this is one thing where you don't want to mess around. Now, do you need to get the Snap-on set? Nah. And I think probably if you were going to buy one, you'd probably overpay for it. But incidentally, let me tell you, there is a pawn shop on the north side of Mission Boulevard, west of Central. Have you been there, Chuck?
I've
No,
been there.
It's well deserving a trip, because they've got more tools, I think, more good quality tools than probably any other pawn shop I've ever been in. And they deal. So it's they're a nice place, decent place to go. So yeah, just west of, did I say Central? Yeah, west of Central on the north side of Mission, about 2 blocks. While you're down there, you can go down to the one that's on Central just below Mission. But yeah, I know the one on Mission is way cheaper because it's way out of the way and hardly anybody knows it's there. Anyway, it's a good place, and they got tools and they got toolboxes, and go in there. You'll tell me what you come back with. Anyways, my point was that first thing we need to do is we need to find out whether we got a standard or a metric. Now you can do that sometimes with the marks on the head, but sometimes you can't. So, like I said, the size of the bolts is based on the bolt diameter. It's not based on the size of the tool you use, so don't make that mistake. Now, let me do this, and I will run through this pretty quickly. Well, it looks like crap, but it'll work. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, yeah, so that's a grade 5. That's a grade 8. These are standards. And the marking on top of the bolt tells us how strong it is. These bolts do not belong in automobiles. And if you try to use these bolts in automobiles, you're going to be very, very sad. Because if you try to tighten them to automobile tightness, you'll pull the heads right off them. I mean, this is what people put together, bunk beds and swing sets with, but they really shouldn't, because, you don't want to die because you tried to save 15 cents on a bolt. But these are cheap. These are definitely cheap. I mean, it's probably, 12 cents, whatever. Now, the grade 5, you're going to find out, is going to be about 40 cents. And the grade 8 is going to be, I don't know, probably 75 cents. And since people don't know the difference, they're going to go looking for bolts, and they're going to say, well, this is like a quarter of the price of this, and I don't know why, but hell, I'm going to load up on these. Problem is, these things are not made for any stress whatsoever. They're made of inferior material, and it's not treated. It's not hardened. This is hardened pretty good, and it's made of pretty good materials. This is made of premium materials, and it's heat treated insanely great. This is what they make head bolts out of. This is what they make the bolts that hold your seat belts on. Super expensive stuff. I mean, as you can see, buying a set of valve cover bolts in grade 8 would set you back a pretty penny. So, while we don't need to go buck wild and have grade 8 fasteners on everything, when we need a grade 8 fastener, we need to use a grade 8 fastener, right? When you're doing, suspension parts, you don't want them holding on with this. No. This is your general bolt. So, if I was holding on a piece of trim or a dashboard or something like that, it's probably what I would use, or a valve cover I would probably use this on. But my experience, you try to use this on like an alternator bracket, it's really dicey. And all you have to do is strip one hole, and you've made this 15-minute job into a 4-hour job, and you've lost whatever, you know, you've lost the 35 cents that you saved. So most of the stuff you're going to see that's under any kind of stress at all is going to be grade 8, and that's what you should replace it with. And you're going to have to suck it up, because you're going to be sad when you look at this freaking bolt and say, that's 75 cents? Yeah, it is. So what this is it's telling you the hardness, the strength, and the application that it's useful for. Okay, well, all I know about this is there's an 8.8. And I can't remember. What's the other one? 10.9 or something, or 12.4? I can't remember. It's been so long. It's been so long since I had a tool in my hand. Great lesson, Rockcliffe. Anyway, the point I was trying to make was it won't take long. Look what I can do. Metric bolt hardness. Yeah, what's up? Okay, I told you 10.9. See? Okay, so there's an 8.8 and there's a 10.9 and there's a 12.9. That doesn't sound familiar, but whatever. Is that it right there? Well, it's a 5.6. Anyways, there you go. How about that? No, it won't let me. Ah! Metric hardness. All right, so as you can see, there's numbers on the top of metric bolts, some of them. Now, that's going to tell you how strong the bolt's going to be. The number does not tell you what size tool to use. It doesn't. It's just there to tell you how strong the bolt is. Now, what you're going to run into is on a lot of cars, the heads of the bolts are not going to be marked pretty much at all. They might have tool marks like from the foundry they came from, but they're not going to be giving any indication about how hard they are or how strong they are. Go. Oh, that's a nice chart right there. Tell you what, take a picture of that. What do you think about that, Chuck? I've never seen that chart before.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right? Okay, so you can see that there's a correspondence between grade 5 and grade 8 and grade 8.8 and grade 10.9. Every once in a while, I mean, if you go aftermarket, you will find these markings on the top, on the heads of the bolts. Most of the time, like if I'm taking apart a Toyota or something like that, you're not going to see those numbers on top of the bolts. You might see a foundry mark, but you're not going to see these numbers. Anyways, the same applies. Don't be using cheap hardware in any kind of stressful situation, because, I mean, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. So, I mean, you could use that one. I mean, that's nice too. So we need to understand how to tell the strength of a bolt by looking at the head metric. Because after all, if you don't be stripping no holes, if you don't be stripping no threads, you won't be having to repair no threads, and that's the big thing, really. And if you see that someone has come in there with some bogus Bushi bolt, you need to replace it with something good before it breaks and causes you a whole bunch of heartache. Yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right, so what we're looking at here, come on. Here and here. Incidentally, right now I'm going off of your task list where it says we got to do thread repair. So That's where we're going for the next 55 minutes. So that's the first thing though. If you don't strip a thread, you ain't gonna have to repair a thread. Repairing thread comes from stripping them, so that's no good. Two main causes of stripping.
Over tightening.
Yep.
Yeah.
Over tightening. Now, how does that happen? Because you just want to give it another squeeze. And cross threading.
Oh, okay.
So, what's cross threading?
When
Cross
the
threading is when the bolt goes like this, but the hole goes like this.
yeah.
See the coronavirus. See the bolt. See how the bolt's not going in straight? That's a problem. So, folks, let's remember what's at stake when we're putting bolts on and nuts and stuff like that. Let's remember what's at stake, because it's very, very easy to get addicted to the impact, because the impact is groovy and it feels good using it, but it's potentially an extraordinarily destructive piece of equipment. So we got to be very, 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 very careful what we use it on and when. Do us all a favor, and when you're putting in a bolt, if you insist on using an impact, which sometimes is the entirely appropriate tool, make sure that you turn this 3 or 4 threads by hand before you put an impact anywhere near it. Yeah. Now, if you try to put this in crooked like this, it's not going to go 3 or 4 threads by hand. It might go 1 or 2 though, which is why I say 3 or 4. Now, if you put this in with hardcore tools, and the same thing's true with spark plug threads, if you put this in with a 1/2 inch ratchet, chances are good you're not going to feel the resistance. It's just going to chew into it, especially if you're coming in with a steel bolt going into an aluminum hole. Because the aluminum hole, number one, is soft. Number two, if it's had a steel bolt in it for any length of time, it's probably created electrolysis, and it's probably eaten the threads away. Plus, if they've taken this bolt, or the screw, especially a spark plug, if they've taken it out when it's hot, every time you take a spark plug out of aluminum head when it's hot, it's going to bring little silver balls. You know what those silver balls are? That's the threads you used to have in your aluminum head. That's why you're not supposed to remove spark plugs on an aluminum head when it's hot, because you've got steel threads on the spark plug, and it's just going to pull little balls of aluminum out. And eventually you keep doing that, and it's not going to have, it's, you know, when you go to tighten it, it's just going to keep on spinning. Now, folks, I need to remind you, we don't just change spark plugs because Grandpa used to do that on his tractor on the regular, right? Nowadays, spark plugs should last about 100,000 miles. Why? Because we've got precise fuel control, and we've got, you know, precise ignition, and we've got better engine designs, better oil control. So spark plugs should last about 100,000 miles, which means in the lifetime of a vehicle, which is probably maybe 250,000, you should change the spark plugs maybe twice, right? You should choose them. You should change them at 100,000, and you should change them maybe at 200,000, but that's it. Now, people, I think, tend to change the spark plugs too often just because that's the way their dad taught them. That's how you do proper maintenance. No. In fact, the manufacturers have gone out of their way to make it so you don't get under the hood, because chances are good that if you get under the hood, you're going to screw something up. So they want you to leave it alone. That's why they want to make sure. That's why they took all of the maintenance stuff out that we used to do, and it's also why they made all the parts so hard to get to, and it's also why they made the plugs last 100,000 miles, because they want to get you out from under the hood, because chances are good you're going to screw something up. So that's their thinking, and it's pretty good thinking, because everybody says, oh, well, spark plugs, it's easy to do. My father taught me how to do it on the lawnmower. Well, yeah, that's cool, but that's not what we do. I mean, there's a whole ritual of how we do it, and that's why we don't have comebacks, because after all, it takes some brains to do it right. I mean, one of the problems we have in this industry is it's very easy to do it wrong, but doing it right, it takes the ritual, right? It takes the right chemicals and the right, torque wrench, all that. Anyways, why do things get over tightened? Things get over tightened because you're not using the torque wrench, because you don't have a good feel, or you're using the wrong tools. Look, if something's small, if this bolt is small, or if you're doing a spark plug, don't be using the 1/2 inch drive. When you're doing spark plugs, for instance, use your 3/8 drive. 1/4 inch drive is going to be too small. 1/2 inch is going to be too big. So you use your 3/8. And you make sure, since you're going into aluminum threads, almost always, you make sure that you are going in straight. Very delicate, one-handed. And you're going to make sure that these threads are clean. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it wrong. It's fast and easy to do it wrong. I was talking to the kids today about putting in spark plugs with an air ratchet. I've seen people do it, but I would prefer you had 3 or 4 years experience before you started doing it that way, because I can just see a million disasters waiting to happen on that. So anyway, we're talking about thread repair. And thread repair happens because this soft material gets pulled up by the stronger material. Now, is it possible to strip threads in cast iron? Yeah, but it's a lot more difficult. It's easy to do with one of our impacts, because our impacts can do 700 foot-pounds, and that can tear the threads out of pretty much anything if you're not careful. So we don't do that brat, 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 brat. And when I hear that brat, 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 I know something really bad is happening, because there's only a very few applications where that brat, 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 brat is the right thing. For instance, taking the hub nut off of front-wheel drive CV shafts. Yeah, I'll go for that. All right, so what we have to worry about now is thread pitch, because you're going to find that we got this here and this there. Sorry. And this is going to go like that. Draw this carefully so you don't get confused. Yeah, see the difference?
Hmm?
That's called coarse thread, and that's called fine thread. Even if it's the same size bolt, it's a 1 inch 3/8 diameter bolt. Is 3/8 the size of the tool you use?
No.
No, that's 9/16. 3/8 is the bolt diameter. Good, Michelle. Good. So that's coarse thread. We would say that's NC. This is fine thread. That's NF, National Fine, National Coarse. Now, the worst part about it is metric has 3 different thread pitches. So we need to make sure we got the right thread pitch. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by using this little measuring thing right here. I would use the card. Chuck's right. If you're gonna be in this game for any amount of time to any degree of intensity, get yourself one of those little cards, even if it's a plastic one. Get yourself one of those little cards. Now, this thing right here is exactly what Chuck was showing you, and what it's going to do is it's going to tell you what the thread pitch is on. It's going to show you what the thread pitch is on whatever fastener you're dealing with. Gonna focus? Yeah, there you go. Okay, Chuck's is nicer, of course, just like pretty much everything. But you have to understand that there's different thread pitches. Okay, so
You can pick them up at Lowe's.
yep, for cheap.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be an expensive, fancy one.
What is it called?
Called a thread card or something like that. Does it say what they're calling? Does it say what they're calling them, Chuck?
This one's called Gauge It, hardware gauge.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that or not.
Cool.
Focus or not focus? I can't tell.
I got it. Thanks.
That right there is called a tap. And as you can see, it has teeth here and teeth here. And it's got little grooves in it. Like that. Yep, it's called a fluted tap because the little spaces, between. Yeah, see, I can use the shine off my bald head. There we go. Fluted tap. The little spaces in between are called flutes, and that's where the chips are going to go that are going to be used when you cut threads into a hole, or when you clean up dirty threads or rusty threads or whatever. It's going to go in these flutes. Now, the thing is, if you let these flutes fill up and you keep turning this tap, chances are good it's going to get stuck and you're going to break it because this tap is hard, super hard. Okay, so what does that mean? Hard and strong are two different things, remember? Porcelain is hard. It ain't strong, though. Glass is hard. It's not strong, though. Hard means resistant to deformation. Strong means
Resistance to
when
breaking.
you bend it, it comes back, right? It's capable of carrying great loads.
Mhm.
You know, like you can't put a bunch of stuff on a glass, like on a window. Windows are not good for carrying stuff.
No.
Anyway, so we got to make sure that these flutes do not get clogged up. And for sure, what we need to do is make sure that we are using the proper lubricant.
Bless you.
Excuse me. I must be allergic to taps. So cutting fluid, right? Chuck, what do you think about cutting fluid?
I use some little bit of oil, but I usually pack the die with some grease.
Oh, to catch the chips?
Yeah, catch the chips, and then I'll clean off the old grease. I'll repack it again, and then retap it.
Especially if you're going to be doing spark plug threads. Yeah, that grease trick works out good. What he's talking about is you put grease in these flutes right here. So as it cuts chips, the chips get stuck in the grease instead of, like if you're coming down here, instead of falling down. But you got to keep going in, coming back out, clean out, repack, go back in, coming back out, right? You don't want to be in a hurry when you're using the tap. I've seen people use drill presses on these, and I've seen people use drill motors on these, but you know what? They got lucky, and pretty soon your luck runs out. You're supposed to use a tap handle like a nice person, like a civilized person. Tap handle looks like this, and you can get tap handles that are, 2.5 feet long. And you put this little rascal in there. Looks like that when you're done. Now, there's a proper approach to using a tap, because remember, this is a potentially very destructive device because it's got sharp teeth. So you need to make sure that when you come into your hole that you're coming in straight down, not tilted to one side, because this thing will cut threads. It will. So you need to come down straight. And if you want to use a T-square or whatever to make sure that you're coming in straight, well, use a T-square. So what you're going to do is you're going to come in and you're going to turn it like one turn, and then you back it off a quarter of a turn. That'll cut the chip. If you're cutting a chip, that'll cut the chip. Then you're going to turn it like maybe one turn, depending on whether you're going into cast iron or steel or aluminum. And then you're going to back it off a quarter turn to break the chip. Incidentally, if you're going into aluminum, you need to use aluminum cutting fluid, because if you use just oil, chances are good you're going to have a failure on it. No, Chuck?
I never knew that. What kind of oil for aluminum? Anti-seize or what?
Aluminum, no, aluminum cutting fluid.
That's what they make.
But-
Okay. All right.
You know, if you're not doing it a lot, maybe you'll be okay. But if you're doing it a lot, you need to use aluminum cutting fluid. So turn it one turn and then back it off a quarter turn, and you'll feel a little clunk, and that's the chip being cut. Because you don't want big long chips, because what happens is they get stuck in the flutes, and then you're like, well, I'll just give it a little bit more juice, and then you break the tap, and then you're freaking screwed. Then you got to get tap extractors, and it's bad. So as you can see, when I do it, this is a slow process, and I'm going to bring the tap out, and I'm going to make sure that it's lubricated. Yeah, I am, because this thing is going to create a whole lot of friction because it's got a whole lot of force. You know, that's why this handle is so long. Yeah, now this is a special tap. If you can see, it's got partial threads on the end. That's a regular tap. This one, on the other hand, has full threads all the way to the end. That's called a bottoming tap. It's for making threads all the way to the bottom of the blind hole, which is to say a hole that doesn't go through. So there's a couple of different types of taps. One thing I need to warn you is this tap right here is tapered. It's bigger here than it is here. That's called a tapered pipe tap, NPT, National Pipe Thread. Pipe thread is well, I'm just going to put a square head on it. Call that a pipe plug. As you can see, it's tapered. And the reason it's tapered is so that if the threads are loose, you can stick it in there and it'll create a wedge and it'll stop the leak. However, let's ask my good friend Chuck, are you going to put a pipe plug in dry?
No, I use Teflon tape.
Okay,
Yeah.
good start. We're going to either use Teflon tape or we're going to use Permatex 2B, depending on whether we're expecting to take it apart or not. We're going to use some kind of lubricant though, because what we want to do is we want to fill up all these little crevices, nooks and crannies, so that, see, because the thing is, if you don't use Teflon tape or Permatex 2B, you're going to have to tighten this extra hard to get it to quit leaking, and it may still leak. So that's why I'm going to use Permatex 2B or Teflon tape. Now, here's the thing. This is a pipe plug. So if you're not careful and you're putting a steel pipe plug into an aluminum boss, this has wedging action and it will actually split the hole if you tighten it enough, which is why I want to use Permatex 2B so I don't have to tighten as much. Yeah, you ever done that, Chuck? That's awesome.
No, I never had to tighten it up so bad that I hurt the hole, but I do have a question on the taps.
Yeah.
I've been noticing that there's two types of taps now. The one that we're talking about, where you actually make a blind hole, so to speak. And
Okay.
also there's a chasing tap now.
Okay.
That's a little bit smaller, but yet it's not going to make the hole any bigger after you tap it.
Yeah, I mean, that's something to consider, because if your tap is really sharp and pretty new, there's a good chance it's going to be cutting new threads. So what Chuck's talking about is a chasing tap, which is to say it just kind of gets the peaks of the mountains rather than going all the way into the valleys. So it's not going to cut out as much material. Let me finish my pipe plug story.
Okay.
You haven't lived until you finish like a HT 740, which is like you know, the turbo 350, the turbo 400, then it goes to 500, 600, 700s. You finish the whole freaking thing and you're putting a pipe plug in the aluminum place where they put the main pressure gauge, and you just over tighten it a little bit and the whole thing just goes, and you got to take the whole transmission, you got to take all the guts out so you can take it over and get it welded.
Fun.
Oh, did I mention we need this by noon? Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. Things you learn, right? Things you learn. Oh, Alanis Morissette. Yeah. I heard that song last week and was like, no, this is not that bad of a song. So anyways, my point was that thread repair. Now, thread repair is a big deal because once you've stripped all the threads out of that hole, a tap ain't gonna fix it, or at least a tap of that size ain't gonna fix it. So this thing right here is called a fix a thread kit, and there's two ways of doing it. There's the helicoil and there's the time cert, and I got to tell you, the time cert is a billion times better. Let's see. It goes like that. Oh, I got his helicoil. Gross. This thing right here is called a helicoil. This thing right here is called a helicoil. It's a stainless steel coil of, there we go. It's a stainless steel coil of threads. And what you end up, there it goes. See? And what you do is you drill out all the threads that are already wasted. So you drill it oversized. You tap it oversized with a bigger tap. And then you get this little windy tool.
Yep.
Don't use helicoils. Don't use helicoils. Helicoils are terrible. Just use time certs. There's different. Okay, so you get this little windy thing, and you wind the new thread into the threads that you just tapped, and what you're going to end up with, what you're going to end up with when you're done is the original size hole. Except now it's going to have stainless steel threads, which is bitching. In fact, there's a lot of people that if they have aluminum, if they're going into aluminum, they're going to replace all the threads with stainless steel threads anyway, just because if you have aluminum threads and you in and out too many times, it just completely destroys them. Those are called helicoils. I do not suggest using helicoils. However, helicoil tool set will work with what I do suggest. Maybe my good friend Chuck Reyna will start to like me again if I show him some of my tricks. It cost me all my hair to learn. There we go.
Oh,
That's a time cert.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
yeah.
Never seen that?
No,
Oh, dude, this will change your life. Yeah, time cert. Because instead of being a stainless steel coil, which always comes unwound if the moon's shining on you wrong, this uses the same taps, it uses the same holes, but what it does is it's a single cone. So this thing does not come apart. So what you do is you wind this cone in, and then you come in and you smack the top of it. See, if you look right, yeah, time cert versus helicoil. Time cert is a million times better, and it uses the same tools. Problem is, this is a loose coil, so it can come uncoiled. This is one piece. So what you do is you thread this thing in. Of course, you got to get the right size and the right length, and then you come in with one of the tools that's included in the set, and you smack this lip here, and what it does is it goes and it sticks up against the hole, so now it won't come out when you pull the bolt out. Oh, it's all about time certs, dude. All about time certs. Now, where are you going to get time certs? Don't use helicoils. Don't ever use helicoils again. They're freaking awful. Once you get used to time certs, it's like, what?
It just stays in there.
Yeah, it stays in there forever. Yeah, and it's stainless steel. Yeah, and it won't come unwound. So this is the class way to do it, and it uses all the same tools. So if you're heavily invested in helicoils, you'll still be able to use them on this. I'm sure there's got to be YouTube videos on doing time cert installations, and well, see, there you go. There you go. You drill the hole, you come in here, top it off, make it straight. You're making a little chamfer in there, and then you thread it oversized. You screw it in there, and then it comes below the chamfer so it doesn't stick out anymore. So You can get them from Amazon. Now, this is a good way to spend a lot of money. The time shirt way. You can get this stuff at any bolt hardware place. Not like Ace Hard, although you could probably get it at Ace Hardware, but someplace like King Bolts or something like that. But I gotta tell you, unless you're doing it all the time, see down here where you've cut a little space for the top to go into. Little.
What's
little
that
counter.
liquid right there?
What is that liquid? Driver oil, and then that's red Loctite. Red Loctite, which is a thread locking compound. Driver oil. Huh. I haven't done this in a long time. It's carbon steel. I know that much. Once you use this once, you'll never go back to freaking helicoils. Never, ever, never. It's not even close. Not even close. God, you know, we tried to make do with helicoils for the longest, but you just can't trust them. So that is my set of those, which is good because you know, it's the first time I've used them in probably 30 years. They're still making me money, right? Anyway, watch out for pipe plugs because pipe thread is not a straight thread. You know, regular, this one's still got chips on it, nice. Regular threads are straight threads, which is to say, you know, they come down like this. And the measurement is the same here as it is here. But that's a tapered thread.
Oh, I don't think we have your screen.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mhm.
So I'll get old. There we go. That's a straight thread. Not that. That's a tapered thread. And I am absolutely 1000% with Chuck Reyna. You need to put either Permatex 2B or Teflon tape on this. Because after all, pipe thread is there to stop leaks. Be careful about how much you tighten these because you can split stuff with these. It's got a lot of, it doesn't just have force this way, it's also got force out this way. So you can split a pipe with this. Not hard. All right, what else do you need to know? Well, this here is what's called a die. And the die has an inside and an outside. It says ACE 1/2 13 NC. That means the bolt diameter is 1/2 inch, 13 threads per inch, and that's national course. And it's got one beveled end that has a bunch, there's no way you're gonna get this. It has a beveled end that has, yeah, there you go. Has a whole bunch of partial threads.
Mhm.
That's what you start with. That's the side that you point towards the bolt you want to. And again, we got to make sure that these things are straight and level, right? Use lots of lubricant and go slow. And when you turn, every once in a while, turn back about a quarter of a turn and cut that chip so it doesn't screw you up. Now, what?
Getting back to the tap, usually on the side of the tap tells you the actual drill bit you're supposed to use.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The right size hole.
Yep. Or you might find this little tap drill size, or you can definitely find that information on the internet. But that would require you to have, you know, a set of drill bits numbered in a container, in the appropriate container, rather than just a bucket full of drill bits. But yeah, good point. Yeah, we want to use lubricant. We want to use lubricant. What we're going to find out is that one of the major things that distinguishes really good work from adequate work is the proper use of chemicals, really. And we're living in a golden age of chemicals, folks. I mean, back in the day, we used to have terrible gaskets. And we'd be spraying them with that copper crap, head gaskets, spraying them with that copper crap, just like, please let me get 100,000 miles out of this. Now it's like, oh yeah, we'll get 200,000, 300,000 miles out of this head gasket. Amazing stuff, like valve seals, for instance. It used to be when you got 105, 110,000 miles on your engine, it was freaking dead. The rings would be dead. The valve seals would be dead, destroyed by either heat or wear. And, you know, the valve guides would be dead. I mean, all this stuff was terrible. Now we're just going, 300, 400,000 miles all day long if you want to change your oil. We're living in a golden age, folks, so let's take advantage of it, you know. Now, here's the thing about that. One of the most common threads you're going to strip is spark plug threads. Now, there's a special tool for that, and if you're going to do a lot of this work, that's what I would suggest. But if you're not doing a lot of this work, I wonder if you can borrow it at like the auto parts store. It's a special tap, and what it does is it's going to, okay, well, let me back up. Why do the spark plug threads get stripped so much?
Okay.
Because people are playing with them too much. And the big reason is because they're taking spark plugs out while the engine is still hot. Well, you know, the threads are made of aluminum. It's an aluminum head, and the threads are made of aluminum. Well, when aluminum is hot, it's a soft metal when it's cold. So when it gets hot, it's even softer. So when you take that steel spark plug out of those aluminum threads, what you're going to find is it's like running a tap down there, just like Chuck was talking about, running a tap down the aluminum hole and how it's pulling out metal. You're going to find when you pull those spark plugs out that there's little tiny silver balls on those spark plug threads. And what it is it's what used to be the threads in your head. So what happens is now you put the new spark plug in and you go to tighten it and it just keeps turning. Yikes. So now what you do is you get that specialized tool. I used to have one. I don't know what happened to it. But you get the specialized tool so you can rehab the spark plug threads. And I hope for your sake that it's pointing down and easy to get to, not pointing, you know, towards the firewall or something like that, because you got to make sure it goes in straight. And then you put the stainless steel threads in. And Chuck's trick about filling up the flutes with grease has never been more important, because what's going to happen is all those little aluminum chips are going to get caught in the grease. Then you take the grease out. Then you take the tap out, you take the grease out, re-grease it, put it back in, go slow. And eventually what happens is, man, I used to have that tool. What happens is then you put in new stainless steel threads. Now these race guys that are changing spark plugs a lot, they're just automatically going to put in the stainless steel threads into the aluminum heads, because if you don't, the aluminum head will let you down at the worst possible time. I don't know if you can rent those at local auto parts store, but just so you know, because I got to tell you what's going to happen is you're going to go to one of these shops around here and they're going to tell you, oh yeah, you have to replace your head now. No, you don't. We are living in the golden age of specialized tools, folks. So stuff where we used to have to replace the head is now just a matter of getting some tools and getting after it, you know. Golden age. Age of miracles and wonders. Good old Paul Simon. Huh. I guess being old beats the alternative, I suppose.
Right.
All right, so that's what I know about thread repair. The number one thing you need to know about thread repair is don't strip threads in the first place, right? We have a tendency to get overly excited. We have a tendency to use brute force tools where we should be using finesse. And as a result, we tend to get ourselves in trouble that we shouldn't. I used to repair copiers, and I introduced the use of, you know, screw guns. And I had like this 9.6 volt screw gun, and it was great for taking apart copiers and stuff like that. Problem is, I kicked it up to like a 12 volt or a 14 volt, and it was just insanely way too much power, and it was very, very bad. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can have too much power, and you got to understand that we have a bunch of powerful tools in the shop. They're not for everything. They're for use where big power is needed. And if big power isn't needed, let's use some smaller tools so that we have less chance of danger. Lug nuts tend to get stripped because remember, when we're putting, well, let me show you. If I was going to give a lecture on thread repair, you know what I would do? I would spend 2/3 of my time talking about not stripping threads in the first place. What did Abraham Lincoln say? If I had 4 hours, to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 3 sharpening the axe. Something like that. Get it?
Mhm.
What do you think, Chuck?
Preparing your tools, get a plan is always the best way to go.
Yep. Okay.
For F-150.
If someone said something, I didn't hear it.
I heard one F-150.
I heard
Huh.
that too.
Yeah, I have a F-150 and the spark plug.
Yep.
Somebody put the heating coil when it's coming out again.
That's because they used a helicoil instead of a time cert.
And they put the other side heating coil.
Yep. Yep. Well, like I said, you know, old school guys that were taught the old school way and didn't really go to real school,
Mhm.
they think you're supposed to change the spark plugs every 40,000 miles, 50,000 miles. You're not. In fact, if your spark plug's bad, how will you know? Come on.
You don't get a spark. Your car won't start, right?
Well, no, if you have one bad spark plug, your car will still start. It'll
Oh,
run
okay.
bad though. But come
Or
on
loss
now,
of power.
The timing off?
you're gonna have loss of power, but
Fuel
what?
economy.
Okay, you're gonna have loss of power, you're gonna have bad drivability, you're gonna have bad fuel economy. But if
Yeah.
you have a spark plug that's not working, how are you gonna know? Is there a light somewhere?
A check engine
Mhm.
light.
Yeah,
Not
your
my
check
truck.
engine light's gonna come on, right? misfire cylinder 7 or whatever. Yeah.
Hopefully it comes.
If I'm not getting a misfire code off of the spark plug, I tend to leave the spark plugs in because I'm just nervous about the spark plug. The whole spark plug thing just makes me nervous. And I think spark plugs get changed way too often. And if you go into a shop and they tell you you need to change your spark plugs, I would be very, very suspicious that they're just trying to run up your bill. Very, very suspicious. Because if you didn't come in there with a check engine light, you probably don't need your spark plugs changed. Unless like you got 100,000 miles and they've never been changed. But most of these places around here, they're going to be like, oh yeah, you should change your spark plugs every 50,000 miles. No, 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 leave the car alone. Leave the engine alone. The manufacturer has made it to get you to leave it alone. Because they don't want you touching it. Because they don't trust you, nor should they. All right, I've got a lug nut here. I've got a wheel stud there. Always put the nut on 3 or 4 turns before using an impact. That in itself will save you. Don't be mixing up lug nuts, right? That's why we're always going to put all the lug nuts from our vehicle in one container. Yeah, so if there's 15 different lug nuts sitting on the table, they're not going to be mixed with ours because ours are going to be in one container, right?
Mhm.
We're going to be systematic and we're going to try to build good habits. Why? Because if we don't have good habits, we're going to have problems. And these problems make Grandpa very, very nervous. I got to tell you, the reason they make Grandpa very, very nervous is because Grandpa has spent many an evening past midnight trying to get a car back on the road. And Grandpa's administrators were not happy about that because they're like, why are all these people at the school after midnight, unsupervised? You know, if someone got hurt, you know, can you imagine someone got knocked out or something? The
Yeah,
liability
yeah.
involved. So, yeah, so Grandpa gets nervous. That's why I hate to say it, but I like when all the projects are done at 8:30 and it's just like, cool, now we can chill and now we can have fun and just stand around and talk and blah, blah, blah. What drives me up the freaking wall is when there's like 6 cars that need to go on the lift and everybody's standing around freaking talking instead of, you know, being in a, not being in a hurry, but moving quickly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because like I said, folks, just assume everything's going to take twice as long as it should, and that'll give you a happy state of mind, because usually it'll take about the right amount of time, but often, especially if you're a beginner, often it won't. And if you've budgeted twice as much time as it should take, then when things go wrong, you won't be all flustered and freaked out. And you won't say, well, you know, it's 8:15. Can I start this McPherson strut job? You know? Okay. So I'm just telling you, you know, they don't want me there after 9. And I don't want me there after 9 because I've been working since 8 in the morning, you know. And you know how hard it is talking about working, quack. I haven't worn shoes all day. Yeah, these days will soon be over, folks. Yeah, soon. All right, so put it on 3 or 4 turns by hand before you use that impact. If it goes on 3 or 4 turns, you're okay. What you have to watch out for is there are certain combinations of metric and standard where it'll actually turn. I've seen it turn like 2 turns without being the right size. And our impacts are freaking murderous. So the question is, are you going to say, well, it's probably just a little dirt on the threads, I'll just keep pulling the trigger? Therein lies danger. Yeah, so let's not do that. Now, that's thread repair. What else do you need to know about thread repair? Like I said, if you use the right sealer on this, you won't have to tighten it half as much. And that's going to preserve the hole. When this is properly installed, it should only go 3 or 4 threads in and then tighten up. If it's going way past that, it's because too many people have over tightened this, and as they do it, sorry, too many people have over tightened this, and as they do, the hole keeps getting bigger and bigger. True. All right. What else can I tell you? Don't use cheap hardware. Don't use cheap hardware. And if you see cheap hardware, get rid of it. Ditch it before it causes you problems.
Don't strip it in the first place.
Yeah, if you don't strip it in the first place, you don't have to repair it. And I got to tell you, we have not had much in the way of strip fasteners. It's cool, you know, which is freaking awesome, actually.
Yeah.
So if you have to buy the repair kit for the spark plug threads, it's not that expensive, I don't think. It used to be like 35 bucks, something like that. Come on. Come on. There you go. Metric, standard. That's the one I'm used to, right there. Oh, this one right there. That's what
Yeah.
I'm used to. See, it's got the big thread, and it's got the small thread. Small thread makes sure it goes in straight, and then it cuts a new thread, and then you put in a beautiful, beautiful time cert instead of a lame helicoil. See, once you get used to the time cert, that's lame. And see, it's got these teeth up here. So what you do is you end up coming in here with this beveled tool and smacking it, and the teeth go against the hole so that the threads don't back out anymore.
Cool.
That's what you need. No more of this bougie helicoil nonsense. No, don't get that. Let's see. How much? $38. Watch. $29. And it's got 3 different sizes, right? Because you got to get that size right. And it's got 3 different sizes. So, hell, Chuck said he'd be right over. Well, this one, okay, that one's $38. So I guess I was pretty
50.
close. But I'll tell you, the price hasn't gone up in 30 years. That's kind of cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, they got 230,000 transactions with a 99.5. I'd say that was pretty good. I think Save a Thread makes the best setup. At least I've had good luck with it. So, what do you think, Chuck?
Looks pretty good. Have you ever seen a video on the Ford 3 valves? Those are notorious for blowing out
Yeah,
spark plugs.
yeah.
Right?
And they have a special tool. It's a big deal to put those inserts in, but they use a special glue to put on the threads.
To
Yeah.
remove the spark plug broken.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, huh? Yeah, because the spark plugs break. Yeah,
Kitty.
that's what you get for driving a Ford.
Yeah.
No, we were in high school. We were talking today about the difference between single overhead cam and double overhead cam. And I was like, my Cobra had dual overhead cam. That was just freaking awesome. That was a great car, except for the fact that once the tires started spinning, you had no idea where you're going to end up. Crowd killers, but other than that, it was a great car. One of the best sounding high revving cars I've ever had. Yeah. Don't strip no threads, won't be no thread repair. All right, so move and replace timing belt. How is that a P1? I don't understand. I would never ever put an entry-level technician on replace timing belt. That seems crazy to me. That's something for someone with a little expertise. Well, a lot of expertise. Okay, so what we talked about today was engine repair number 4. Install engine covers using gasket seals and sealers as required. Didn't really talk about seals. Okay, 7 minutes. All right, here's a seal.
Sharon.
There you go. I think it goes like that. There you go. Yep. That's a seal. Probably like a front cover seal, or could be a rear main seal, front main seal, could be a camshaft seal, could be any number of things, right? I mean, there's a lot of seals that look like that. Are we going to put Permatex 2B on the outside of that seal?
Yeah.
I am. This part's rubber in here. It's probably got a spring that's going to keep it in tension. That's why you're supposed to use a seal driver when you install this. But whatever you do, don't use a freaking ball peen hammer, because this part right here is sheet metal. And if you use a ball peen hammer on it, it's going to distort it, and then you're going to end up with a leak. So this thing right here, come on now. That's called a seal driver. Now you could use a 1/2 inch extension and use a big socket and turn it backwards. But a real seal driver is going to have this little nub coming out the front that's actually going to go in here, and it's going to keep the spring under tension so the spring doesn't pop out. Because if the spring that keeps this seal under tension pops out, you're going to end up with a leak. But you got to use something as a seal driver so that when you're hammering this seal in, it's going to be evenly pushed in. And you got to make sure this isn't cocked in the hole. Now, I'd imagine YouTube's got to have a billion videos on how to do this. But you got to be very, very careful that this doesn't get cocked in the hole. In fact, one of the things I'm worried about, one of the problems we had is when we pulled the transmission out of the transaxle on the red Corvette, the guys kind of laid the tail shaft on the seal between the two, and it jacked up the seal. The seal got, distorted, and now I got to replace it. So there's seals on both axles that need to be replaced, just because the gods will be angry if we don't. And there's a seal in between the transaxle and the transmission that we need to replace. So got to get back in the shop, man. You got to get back in the shop. Use something that's going to allow you to put even pressure on this surface. Don't just use a ball peen hammer. If you have to use a block of wood or like a block of aluminum would work good. Something to spread out the load so it doesn't just distort this. Now you're gonna have to come in here flat and straight on this. If you come in crooked, chances are good you're not going to be able to get the end that's still stuck out in. Got to make sure we don't distort the seal. And like I said, it's probably got a spring behind it to keep tension on the seal. You got to make sure that that spring does not come out. There's professional seal drivers for this stuff, but if you're not doing it all day, I doubt you would want to invest in them. Unless, like, if I did nothing but Model A transmissions all day, I would for sure have the special tools that made that quick and easy. But if you're just, some civilian working in your driveway, I don't know that would be a prudent maneuver or a wise maneuver. There's a million ways. You can go on YouTube and figure out, how to do it. I'd love to show you. In fact, I could show you in 15 seconds if
Go for it.
not here.
Oh.
Let's go down to the shop. Okay, so we talked about engine repair 4, and we talked about 6. So let us go ahead and we talked about lubrication 4. We already talked about lubrication 5. We talked about removing, inspecting, replace thermostat, gasket, and seal. I don't know. We should talk about cooling systems at some point. Actually, Chuck, I have a really good lesson about the 5 elements of tune-up. Spark, advance, compression, timing. I'm sorry, advance and timing are the same. Spark, timing, compression, air, and fuel. I have a really good lesson for that, but I didn't want to lose the nuevecitos. But maybe I'll do that next time, because I would like to do something for the veteranos so that they don't get all sad about being basic.
Good review.
Yeah. So part of what we did was, inspect and replace power steering hoses and fittings. If you have a pipe fitting, I would strongly suggest you use Teflon tape. You gotta be careful when you're using Teflon tape. Don't get it over the edge. Don't get little shards of Teflon tape in the pump, just like we were talking about getting RTV and the pump screen, intake screen. Teflon tape will do the same thing, so let's be very careful to make sure that we are policing up our Teflon tape and it's not getting all over the place. It's one of the things about Teflon tape. You got to be kind of fastidious about making sure it doesn't get inside the hydraulic flow. Good. So what I want you to do is look at this chart. Let me know what you need to move forward on it. I mean, can you do this stuff in your driveway? Sure. Yeah, you can do this stuff on your own car in the driveway. In fact, I would kind of suggest it. I mean, because we may not get back in the shop. Frankly, we may not get back in the shop till January. Super frankly,
Oh. Really?
super frankly, yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, it's a farce now, and it's so, people can. Well, the question is, how long will you put up with it?
Yeah. All right.
If a bully is picking on you, the question is how long you'll put up with it, right? That's what stops it. So anyways, of course, that has nothing to do with our current political situation because I know everyone in government has my best interest at heart and yours too. So anyways, I sure had a great time with you guys tonight. And hope it was
Great
useful.
class.
And yeah, these are happy times. I got to tell you, I look forward to this class all week because you
Me
know
too.
the children don't interact, so it's like everybody turns the camera off, and it's like I'm not even sure if they're still awake. So
Oh no.
appreciate it, guys. All the best
Okay,
to you.
thanks so
Have a great
much.
weekend, and I will see you. Thank you. What?
Getting back to that Corvette seal, is it that hard to get that seal in there?
No,
Okay.
no, but probably is for a 15-year-old. No, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. I got all the stuff. I just gotta
Where's,
unpack all my
what's
stuff.
Rudy doing? Did he just give up on us or what?
You know, I don't know. There's a possibility. Maybe he thinks this is too basic for him or something. I don't know.
Huh. I'll
So
get on his case.
yeah, let me turn off the recording so I can tell you what I really think of Brady. That was a joke.
Okay,
stop
thank you so
recording.
much.
Yeah, thank you.